what might be done to protect potential violations of our democracy in the future. For more on that front, I am joined by Congressman Adam Schiff, one of the sponsors of the Protecting Our Democracy Act. Congressman, welcome back to Inside the Issues.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
When people hear you and your colleagues make the case that our democracy is in danger, some might think, oh, I've heard this before. This is political posturing. This is hyperbole. I know that you're quite sincere and passionate about this. Can you explain the current threat as you see it and why this legislation is necessary?
Yes, thank you. Our democracy has really been at risk over the last 4 years, and we've been moving in the wrong direction. The bill that I've introduced, the Protecting Our Democracy Act, aims to reinstate the guardrails that protected our democracy in the past. So, for example, it addresses the problem of a president who simply says, I'm going to ignore all subpoenas. I'm going to defy Congress in violation of the separation of powers. This would expedite court enforcement of congressional subpoenas so that we can get answers from an administration so we can reveal corruption or wrongdoing. It would also prevent a president from using the Justice Department as their own personal law firm or to persecute or prosecute their political enemies list. It would allow new protections for inspector generals to be fired only if there's good cause. It has protections for whistleblowers. It prevents abuses of the pardon power. It prevents a president from committing a crime while in office and avoiding accountability because they can't be indicted while they're in office and the statute of limitation runs before they get out of office. These and probably a dozen more reforms were made necessary by the abuses of the last 4 years. Those abuses cumulatively, along with others that are going on now to try to erode people's right to vote, really have jeopardized our democracy. It's how democracies come to an end.
You have not mentioned his name specifically, but hearing this long list of provisions in this legislation, as you mentioned, the past 4 years, it really seems in many ways like this act is tailor-made for Donald Trump. And yet, on the Protecting Our Democracy website, you and your colleagues clearly state that the former president is a symptom and not a cause. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yes. What Trump did is reveal so many of the weaknesses in our system, cracks in the foundation of our democracy that could be exploited by an unethical president. And it's in the interest, I think, of both parties for us to close those fissures in our system to make sure that whoever comes in the future, whether it's a Democratic president or a Republican one, if they aim to corrupt that office and abuse their power and try to stay in power even when they lose. And we saw the last president, and you played a clip from this, attempt to overthrow the results of a popular election that he lost. We need to put in place protections to make sure that can't happen because it almost happened. And so for those who think, is it hyperbole to say that our democracy is at risk? It's not at all hyperbole. Democracies generally come to an end not through violent overthrow, but through the slow diminution of democratic safeguards, through quasi-legal means that erode a democracy. And that's what we're trying to guard against.
Yeah. You've got a lot of colleagues from all over the country who support the Protecting Our Democracy Act, but they are all Democrats. I'm curious what the response has been from your colleagues across the aisle to date, and given how we talked earlier in the program about the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, which things have come to an impasse there. Are you concerned that this legislation might find a similar fate?
The bill has very strong bipartisan support in the country. These are all good government reforms that enjoy the support of Democrats and a great many Republicans. In fact, there are now 150 good government organizations, both liberal and conservative, that are urging Congress to pass this legislation. In the Congress, though, many of the Republican members have lived in fear of retribution from Donald Trump. And to the degree that they view this bill as an implicit criticism of his abuses of power of the last 4 years, they may be too intimidated by the former president to support the bill. I hope that's not the case. I hope that their love of Constitution will outweigh their fear of Donald Trump. but time will tell. Many of the provisions in the bill not only had Republican support in the past, they had Republican sponsors of these provisions in the past. So if they're really true to any ideals at all, they should support this and make sure that a president of either party can't abuse their power.
Congressman Schiff, in just a few moments, we're going to take a look at the situation that's been developing on the border in Texas and the response to Haitian immigrants who have been seeking refuge. Images of white Border Patrol officers on horses rounding up these immigrants have really been disturbing to a lot of people who've seen them. You recently tweeted, and I'm quoting here, "Reports of their mistreatment are a stain on our legacy. Those responsible must be held to account." I'm curious, what do you envision in terms of being held responsible, and to what extent should the current president, Joe Biden, who of course promised a fair and humane immigration system, be held accountable for what's been happening in recent days?
Well, I think we need a thorough investigation of what took place at the border, and those who were on horseback and were mistreating people, and those images are revolting. They need to be held accountable in every way they can under the law. I certainly think that those that are engaged in that kind of mistreatment ought to lose their jobs. But depending on what those actions were, and if they brought about injury to other human beings, then it may go beyond that. In terms of the president, the buck always stops with the president. But at the same time, we don't expect the president to be at the border all the time and overseeing every action of the many hundreds of thousands, indeed millions, who work for the federal government. But it's certainly his responsibility to make sure that that investigation is not interfered with, that it's objective, and that we treat people humanely, both in the continuing situation with these migrants, but also in our immigration policy overall.
Adam Schiff represents California's 28th district in Congress. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.